Is this for you? Is that not for you? Not for you. Okay. Go ahead. Garth Drabinsky. What the Spider Woman was performed here, right? And that was a big moment in your life. Wasn't it here?
It was.
Yeah, okay.
It was actually almost 8 years ago to today. Cheetah Rivera, Brent Carver, a gay window dresser who was in love with movies and a political dissident in a cell in a totalitarian state. The world premiere of Kiss the Spider Woman on this stage, The Power of Theater. In 1974, a play from South Africa burst like a bomb onto the international theatrical scene. It was written by the seminal South African playwright Ethel Fugard, who happens to be white. Fugard has been considered a tremendous hero in terms of his opposition against the South African apartheid regime. The Island was one of 5 Fugard Township plays written between 1958 and 1973, at a time when the racist division of South African society was even more ruthlessly entrenched. The plays, all of the township plays in particular, dealt with the most vicious segment of the apartheid's regime, the security police of the Eastern Cape, the same security police that killed Stephen Biko and so many others who stood up in defiance against the South African opposition. The island is in fact Robben Island, where Mandela and so many others were incarcerated, a little strip of land off the coast of South Africa, where security was so tight that the only way to get news through was by whispering from mouth to ear or by scribbling on tiny pieces of paper. The island pays homage to all of those who created and are still creating a living theater in South Africa. It is an unequivocal indication that the need is still there, the need to express through theater the fiery joy and the bitter anger whenever survival is necessary. The island reflects the universal reality of all ages whenever there is oppression of one segment of society against the other. In many ways, the island represents a thematic theme that ran through a great deal of my work as a producer in the theater over the past 10 years. You see, I've always believed that art, and specifically the theater, can act as a powerful catalyst for social change. One of the most powerful influences the theater makes is its extraordinary ability to speak out against intolerance, against racism, bigotry, and prejudice, the human afflictions, while at the same time attempting to build an enlightened and more broad-minded society. Civilization, as we have learned and are continuing to learn throughout these days, is advancing at unparalleled dimensions, but regrettably, our ability to live side by side is progressing at a much more slower pace in terms of compatibility. Now, the 2 black actors who provide the irrepressible energy for the 90 minutes or so in Fugard's play are living, through the words of Fugard, a Kafkaesque circumstance, a bizarre labyrinth. But as Kafka too wrote, we have weapons, our existence is embodied in artistic expression. Now, during the past 22 months, I've had a more focused opportunity to closely examine the Canadian cultural landscape. My conclusion today is that we are in a dire predicament. We are in a severe danger of letting the arts' flames of beauty, of enlightenment, and defiance die out. We are facing in Canada what I term mounting cultural deprivation, the product of a lack of commitment by all governments and by all parties who have essentially abandoned moral leadership and influence and the appropriate levels of spending required to perpetuate a Canadian artistic environment that flourishes at the level that all great civilizations need to be. This is no doubt the residual effect of the belt-tightening economic policies that crippled the early 90s in Canada, that emaciated public spending, and that correspondingly paved the way for anorexic private sponsorship of the arts. The sad irony is today that we have widespread economic prosperity, real economic peace on our borders. We have the healthiest and most educated population in our history. We have fortified our bodies. We have enriched our bank accounts. But our leaders have proven simply incapable of demonstrably articulating the importance of the arts and nurturing the human spirit of this country. They have turned their backs on the soul of this country, and the facts continue to mount as our arts flounder. Last year, the Toronto Symphony Orchestra was on strike for 11 weeks. Now, the story barely made the front pages of the newspapers throughout the country. It barely even made the editorial columns of the same newspapers. The orchestra remains today only with a part-time executive director. Its spectacular musical director, Jukka-Pekka Sarast, who spoke today, has decided to leave Toronto, to leave Canada for the more arts-positive environment of Europe. The orchestra now neither has the money nor necessarily even the stature to attract a worthy successor. And finally, build that acoustical womb that is so necessary to show off the musical craftsmanship of its members. The National Ballet continues a tortuous and destructive battle to retain the rights of its artistic director to impose his artistic vision for the company. Cascades of negative publicity have split open and severed the company and demoralized the board. A lot of prejudice publicity, I may add, from one of Canada's national newspapers that is not the National Post. Publicly, there seems to be a lack of understanding that the work of the artistic director of a company is inextricably linked to the fortunes of that organization. The Canadian Opera Company continues to search for a new home for itself and presumably the National Ballet. Plans continue to fall through amidst recrimination and finger-pointing government sources of financing back in and back out. In the interim, the COC's coffers are not brimming forth with endowment monies necessary to commission new works of art, necessary to bring international stars to its stage, to broaden the appeal of its work to larger audiences, which in turn will give it more financial momentum, which in turn will give it more political support in that quest for that new home. Stratford has been compelled to abandon its original mandate as envisaged by Sir Tyrone Guthrie, that being a national theatre of Canada. Instead, it must produce populist entertainment to sustain itself. New, powerful, and challenging work must be compromised or sacrificed in lieu of the tourist dollar. Stratford has never fused with Toronto. It has never taken advantage, to my knowledge, of touring from Halifax to Vancouver at the end of its season, and the financial capability of that happening is remote indeed. The Toronto Jazz Festival was almost canceled a few weeks ago because a sponsor pulled out. Now, fortunately, at the last minute, it was retrieved. But there is no financial guarantee for that institutional event again for Toronto. At the same time, Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, torn and drawn, stands in front of the hordes in New York City and proclaims a $103 million, 100,000 square foot concert facility built specifically for jazz. When this facility is built, he says, New York will have ensured itself as the center of the cultural world to the end of this new century. The CBC has become a prisoner of the past, lacking the political support to take risks and to cede its Canadian cultural mandate. It is seen by federal politicians as a central focus of the separatist movement, and therefore there's a complete unwillingness to fund its ongoing activities for bold, adventurous, and important Canadian cultural expression. It has become necessary to defend public support of the arts by describing the amount of economic activity and jobs that the investment generates. Arts organizations have got to justify their existence with the term economic multiplier effect, instead of simply extolling the resounding relevance of the arts for this generation and future generations. Now, I've been a sports enthusiast, remarkably, for most of my life. Some people even say that I've been fanatical about the Raptors and the Blue Jays from time to time. Today, our politicians are falling all over themselves to win the 2008 Olympics for Toronto in the name of corporate sponsorship and sports marketing. They are willing to defy all principles of practicability and financial logic and spend billions on a 2-week pageant that will leave us only at the end with a monstrous stadium again that we do not need. Now, I'm a big fan of David Crombie's notwithstanding, but I ask you, what are the indelible memories that were left behind from Mexico City, from Munich, from Atlanta? Certainly no exquisite expression that will be with us, to quote Giuliani, to the end of this new century. Our provincial government only recently announced that it was going to repatriate $200 to every taxpayer in the province of Ontario. Oh, what I would love to do with only half of that $1 billion for the arts. That new opera ballet hall, that new symphony hall, the substantial endowing of every reputable arts group throughout this province, the funding of regional schools for artistic expression, again, throughout this province. Think of the intellectual multiplier effect that that would have to sustain our society into the next century. The truth is that we have defiled and we have violated the essence of art, which is simply this. Art is an aesthetic spectacle that needs nothing more for its justification than its singular ability to show us who we are. Our leaders of government and business have not been able to use their position and influence and cultivate a new paradigm for arts patronage. And without a powerful infrastructure for the arts, what is going to be the enduring legacy of our time? Today, business leaders are only interested in strategic philanthropy, not supporting the arts for art's sake, but it's a question of not passion, but sponsorship that acts as a foil for the corporate image. Artistic expression is subordinate to corporate agendas. After all the trade agreements are hammered out, after all the electronic superhighways slice across this continent, after the satellites trace the solar system with and without Miss Payette and beyond, what is going to be the artistic wonders of each society that will contribute to the collective history of the human soul? The only way to grow an artistic community is to grant it an unfettered and open environment where artists do not cower for fear of losing corporate dollars because their work has suddenly gone out of the mainstream. We only need to look to history to make this final point. In ancient Greece, a vibrant artistic community was considered of prime importance in ensuring the stability of that fledgling democracy. Aristotle quoted that it was poetry that is the stuff of greater intrinsic work. And we are reading the words of Sophocles 2,500 years after the event. The pinnacle of the Roman Empire was in the first third of the 2nd century AD, when Emperor Hadrian was leading that vast, vast expanse. Although he achieved vast military and political success, his greatest mark as a patron was of the arts, surrounding himself with poets, with scholars, with philosophers. His architectural triumphs will still stand as stellar edifices of the types that we have never seen again. During the Renaissance, it was the Medici family that took their immense fortune and cast it in terms of arts patronage in support of Botticelli, Donatello, Da Vinci, Michelangelo. In the 17th century, Peter the Great, one of the most notable leaders in the history of Russia, it was Peter who brought Western culture to Russia. Again, the best European engineers, architects, craftsmen, and artists came to Russia. In turn, he sent thousands of Russians to Europe in terms of immersing them in the university environment to master the finer arts. Now, in the 20th century, the essential role of art and the artist had few outspoken political advocates. From a Canadian perspective, it has been the federal French-Canadian leaders who have really inspired Canadians to any extent whatsoever. And it's true that as we reached our centennial in 1967, it was Lester B. Pearson who did invoke a number of cultural projects that, for example, showed the manifestation of the National Arts Center in Ottawa. But in the modern age, the outstanding champion of the public value of art has been the late President John F. Kennedy. Speaking at Amherst College in 1963, only a few weeks before his death, in honor of the great poet Robert Frost, Kennedy commented, "If sometimes our great artists have been the most critical of our society, it is because their sensitivity and their concern for justice, which must motivate any true artist, makes him aware that our nation falls short of its highest potential. I see little of more importance to the future of our country and our civilization than the full recognition of the place of the artist." And he concluded, "I look forward to an America which will reward achievement in the arts as we reward achievement in business and statecraft. I look forward to an America which will steadily raise the standards of artistic accomplishment and which will steadily enlarge the cultural opportunities for all of our citizens. I look forward to an America which commands respect throughout the world, not only for our strength, but for our civilization." So, in conclusion, it is the poet, the writer, the musician, artists of all forms who must be positioned as the cultural foundations of democracy, the spiritual fuel of economic achievement. Democracy requires that we respect, that we honor, and encourage the individual. And few experiences in our society honor the individual more than artistic expression. It is the one enduring source of national greatness and national achievement. And it does not have regard to color, race, religion, or wealth. We are a country with an absence of confidence that somehow seems to pervade so much. Powerful cultural expression, therefore, is vital, because when we don't embrace it, we telegraph to our families, to our sons and our daughters, that we lack confidence in ourselves, and therefore, why should anyone else look at us any differently? Oh, I long for a Canadian leader who is able to echo the insightful words of Kennedy that somehow still resonate so powerfully today. Thank you.